Hello and a very warm welcome to Dateline London. I'm Jane Hill. This week we are reflecting on some movement, finally you might say, in the Brexit talks. And we'll be asking whether the election of a Democrat in Alabama really is a blow to Donald Trump. Let me introduce you to my guests this week, the American writer Stephanie Baker from Bloomberg Markets, Suzanne Lynch, who is now Washington-based for the Irish Times, the British political commentator Yasmin Alabai-Brown, columnist with the Eye, and Thomas Kielinger from Germany's Die Welt. A very warm welcome again to all of you. So, we really have seen the end of the beginning. It was confirmed this week that the Brexit talks between Britain and the EU can finally move to the second phase. What a week for Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May, losing a parliamentary vote in London but getting a round of applause from leading EU figures in Brussels. Although by Friday, Jean-Claude Juncker and Angela Merkel were among those pointing out that phase 2 of the negotiations will be much harder than phase 1. Talks move in January to discussion of the transition period. So, Yasmin, Theresa May very much soldiers on, more than soldiers on, many would say.
And you have to admire her, actually, just when you think she's down and out. Somehow adversity seems to bring out something in her, and you have to admire it.
Weak and stable.
But she's also, I think, I can't imagine what it feels like to be in the position, because she's battling on 6-7 fronts, isn't she? Within her own party, all these issues. So yes, I think one has to admire that she didn't collapse into a heap and start crying. And they applauded, I think, her strength. And quite right. I think the Europeans have been so civilized, I have to say, through all of this. They're a very civilized bunch. I don't think we are very civilized when we're talking about them. So I'm really pleased. But this is not.
But Theresa May presumably has been, because that's why she got a round of applause. Was it Jean-Claude Juncker who said she had been polite, friendly, extremely complimentary?
And she started that in Florence. I think she started that new tone with her Florence speech. You know, the madness of this place was just not getting us anywhere. So she did say, we want to be friends, we want it to be good for Europe, and that was good. Then she comes back to this madhouse that is the Conservative Party, and so she has to negotiate quite a lot. But I think what's to come is so difficult that God help her and us.
One of the things that is to come is a very important cabinet meeting on Tuesday. We might get into that because that goes to the heart of what she has to address within her own party. Let's talk to a polite, civilised European. Thomas is the pinnacle of that.
To be civilised, because, Britain is too big a country to lose, as it were, too big to fail. They need to come to their senses and realise this is a dividing moment in their own history, and we need to come together. We can't kind of be brutal and bloody-minded about Britain. And secondly, there's a reason for Europe to be civilized, because their own house is not totally in order. There are certain aspects of the summit meeting in Brussels which weren't really reported much from Britain, because everyone is focused on Brexit. There is huge problems waiting down the line next year for the EU in the migration issue. The EU is by no means a hard and fast currency to sustain itself. They need new economic rules to make sure the currency survives, and there are plans that the French have put forward of a budgetary harmonization in all of Europe, which the Germans are dead set against it. And talking about Germany, honestly, no reason for Margaret Thatcher to be civilized, because she doesn't have a government.
Where are we with that briefly, Thomas? Because you're right to say none of this has been reported in the UK this week.
Someone told me again in March whether we'll have a government or not by then. It really looks pretty bleak, because the total mess and the total division of opinion inside Germany is such that nobody seems to agree on anything with anybody. And it's I wonder why in Western democracies the outcome of elections are all similarly sort of murky and indecisive. The voters don't seem to trust politicians enough to give any single party a clear majority to rule the country. And that is at the heart of the problem. But Germany really is on a very weak wicket.
We'll come back to that, Suzanne.
Just to pick up on what Thomas was saying there, I agree with him. This idea of Europe being civilized, but I think Europe is itself quite divided both on Brexit, where you have very different views on what Brexit should be from west to east, if you like, but also within its own entity. As you say, migration, there was a huge debate about that on Thursday night in Brussels. There's other things about Eurozone governance, but also things like tax. Countries like Ireland, like the Netherlands, like Luxembourg are very, very worried about moves to harmonise taxation.
Right.
They're losing a big ally with Britain leaving here, so that's a real blow. And I think the loss of Britain here as a huge member of the EU is going to have much more subtle implications in the years to come, not least with the idea of trade and free market. Britain was always a very strong proponent of free market liberalism and standing up, if you like, to the French, not to stereotype too much, but a more protectionist idea of Europe. So I think that the implications there of Britain leaving on the EU are more nebulous, but they will be felt for years to come.
But you see, I think that's a good thing for Europe, because we've not been a good member of the EU. We have not. We have never committed to this relationship. And the low tax and the neoliberalism. We haven't.
Well, what specifics?
Because we've always had this argument. For as long as I've been here, there's been this argument. We don't want to be part of this. We don't want to be part. But then the neoliberal model is bust. And I think, the low tax economies like the ones that you're talking about have to rethink.
Well, maybe that's a different debate. I mean, this goes to the heart of it. In EU treaties, you have national sovereignty over your tax, so it's probably not going to change, unfortunately. But I wouldn't agree with that entirely. Britain may have played the role of being an outsider, but actually its officials in Brussels were very clever at making a lot of the rules actually suit Britain a lot of the time. Yeah. And also the other irony, I think, of Brexit was that Britain had the best of both worlds. It wasn't in the euro, it wasn't in Schengen, it had an opt-out from a lot of justice legislation. So in a way, it was always half in. And it actually had some kind of actually quite a good deal, many people think.
That's what I mean. Never committed politically,
managed to make it work for it.
Emotion. But as time went on, a lot more people in this country felt European. So there was an emotional bond that we feel as now being severed. Okay, and that's partly how, because they wanted it all. But I still feel that for example, the EU-wide action they want to take on the tax paid by the internet giants, or I don't know why I'm pointing, is a good thing. Is a very good thing.
But a lot of countries don't believe that. The Luxembourg, Irish, Dutch, don't they say, well, tax is a sovereign matter. We have the right to set our own tax rates. Ireland, for example, has a lot of the US tech companies, and so it's not as simple. I suppose it comes back to the point. It's not simple as that the EU is just going to be this homogenous body and going to move forward with all these. Defence is another one, and the idea of greater defence. A number of countries in the EU are not members of NATO. They don't want any more cooperation in defence. So,
Susan, I discovered in the civilized language, to use your term, towards Theresa May, a subtle attempt to strengthen her hand in her own country, to make her look rather more impressive than some of the detractors in Britain are saying, so that the middle ground view will gain ascendancy in the May cabinet. So I think it's a subtle way to make sure that not the mad crowd will win the day in Britain.
But at the same time, you had some grumblings within the Tory ranks saying, Margaret Thatcher never got applauded when she won Britain's rebate, so maybe she's given up too much, and she really should be playing hardball a bit more. So, I actually think whatever deal she gets out of the EU will be really a reflection of where the EU is going without Britain, and, we need to really think about that.
Indeed.
You saw some more positive conciliatory statements coming out of the continent. The Belgian Prime Minister, for instance, saying that he thought a Canada plus should be the cornerstone of any future negotiations with the UK, which is sort of in keeping with what David Davis has said, and I think what the majority of the cabinet supports. And I think many people thought a Canada plus deal was completely unrealistic and a bit of a fantasy. But I think how Europe handles this will be a real reflection of where it's going.
But what they've done, and that's really important, David Davis's ramblings that whatever was decided by Mrs. May was just a statement of intent, and they've been very tough. Yours come down very tough. things will be as they are till 2019. The transition period, more or less, everything stays the same because we are playing them. We are playing them.
The transition period is interesting, isn't it? Because we've got March 2019, which is the date, of course, we mentioned time and time again. But actually, if we are looking at a 2-year transition period, things are broadly the same for really very many years to come. We're still part of the ECJ, where the trade deal is going to be very similar.
I think going to fall in because of it. Because you've been a member of the EU for 43 years, so what's another 5 years going to change in this?
And by the time we get to that end point, partly to your point about some of the divisions you saw at the summit this week, Thomas, who knows? Does any of us know what the EU is going to look like by the time we reach that point?
Europe, despite the very slow progress we've seen over the last 12 months, has used the time to become aware how terrible it would be to completely lose Britain. You have to come up with an accommodating sort of deal at the end of the day, because Britain, I keep saying, is too big to fail in the eyes of Europe. She is part of Europe, and so they have to make extra effort to accommodate whatever the discussion will throw up.
I do see what you're saying there, but at the same time, I think we've got a major paradox now approaching on the tracks, which is today Philip Hammond was in China saying that he basically wanted a deal that was going to replicate the status quo. So essentially, saying after saying we don't want to be in the single market and the customs union, that is essentially what they're going to want. And the Northern Ireland issue, not to get too technical, actually crystallised this, because by saying, there won't be a border with Northern Ireland and Ireland, that means that Northern Ireland will stay in the customs union and single market effectively, and that has implications for the rest of the UK. So will it be a copy and paste? We're not really in the single market, but essentially we are. It's the same. And more importantly, will the EU allow that? I don't see that they will if they don't allow free movement in.
And Thomas, you're just such a better British citizen than I will ever be, because you've sucked up to this lot so much. But I am saying to you, the Europeans have said you cannot do any trade deal independently until after this period. Canada, it took them 8 years. So we have more alignment.
The UK has more alignment, doesn't it?
To sort out its contradictions. Before Europe can be accommodating, they're waiting for Britain to really...
It's going to be very difficult from here on out. Theresa May has been able to fudge a number of issues with this preliminary agreement. You can't fudge things in trade talks. The language needs to be very specific. She can't put in language like she did with Northern Ireland, which can mean many things to many people. And so I think, you're right, that she's going to have a very tough, this is not going to be easy. CETA, Canada Plus is going to be a very, very difficult negotiation. And, particularly over financial services, which is really incredibly important to the British economy. Yes. And you can see the continent grabbing, Macron making offers to try to lure banks to Paris.
Already,
and, Frankfurt making similar ploys.
I agree. The number of